how to get your orchids to rebloom, to trigger blooming, to synchronize blooming, or just to encourage your orchid to bloom for a show or perhaps just that special event. We'll show you how to get your orchids to rebloom in their off season. Let's take you through a couple of different orchids and then go through the basics that you need to know to ensure that you can get your orchids to rebloom too. Dendrobiums can be some of the easiest to get to reflower in an off season, because it's not only those new growths that have buds available that can then produce flowers, but even those old pseudobulbs have latent flower buds available to them that can then be pushed forward and allow them to flower during that off season. But we're also going to need to understand how we can get these dendrobiums to flower. We need to understand the triggers for flowering that we need to then apply to them so that we can get them to flower in a season that they might not be used to flowering. So generally for a lot of dendrobiums, they need a rest period, generally a cool and drier rest period than what they'd have during their active growth. And this is what then initiates or matures those flower buds so that these plants can then flower. But do also understand these flower buds take anywhere between 2 and 3 months to then produce open flowers from that initial stage where these buds have just initialized. So you have to make sure that you can keep those climatic conditions for long enough to ensure that those buds are then stable enough to form flowers and not turn themselves into kikis, as what can happen even during their normal flowering periods. If they get water at the wrong periods, in that winter, in that rest time of year, if they get too much moisture, those flower buds are then converted into kikis and you don't get flowers. So the same is going to apply if you are trying to get these to flower out of season. You're going to have to make sure that you keep those climatic conditions exactly what they need so that blooming can occur. And as I said, dendrobiums are a lot easier to get to flower in their off season than a lot of the other orchids, because they're such hardy plants. They have so many flower buds available to them, and their blooming triggers may not be as difficult to accomplish as some of the other orchids. Vanders are another story altogether. There can be an easy answer to getting them to rebloom, and there can be an easy way to overcome it too. And the easy answer is you can't. They won't rebloom in their off season. But what's the easy answer? The easy way to overcome it is that Vanders can be kept in active growth all year round. Well, a lot of them anyway. And as long as you're keeping your temperatures and climates correct, they're going to keep growing. So you've got to keep your temperatures up, you've got to keep your humidity high, you've got to make sure you're giving them enough water and moisture, and you're feeding them enough. And this way you can keep your Vanders in active growth. And since your Vanders are monopodial, they keep growing upwards, and it's in those leaf joints, in the leaf axis, that those flower buds then form. And as your orchid keeps growing up, it produces new leaves, and in each of those leaf axes, a new flower bud forms, and that has the potential to produce a new set of flowers. So that way you can keep your plant in active growth and active flowering all year round. It doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be able to judge exactly when your flowers are going to be produced or when they're going to open, but you can try and prompt them in the right direction by perhaps giving them a slightly higher phosphorus feed, perhaps giving them some of that banana water that we enjoy using so much, and we'll drop a link to that video in the description box below. And that's just to prompt it in the right direction to try and help get those flowers out at the time that you want. But that's about all you can do to Vanders to ensure that you're going to get flowers when you want them. So keeping them actively growing and giving them the right fertilizers. As with Vanders, so with a lot of other of those monopodial orchids, you need that new leaf growth to produce that bud or that flowering bud in its axis so that it can then produce a new set of flowers if it has already flowered from the previous leaf axis. So the flowering should alternate from side to side as your orchid keeps growing up. But Phalaenopsis has a different set of requirements to flower in its off season. We're going to be doing a full video on that, so keep your eyes open. We'll get that to you soon. Myrmecophila tibacinus is another monster all on its own. And orchids that grow similar to this are often just as problematic to try and get to flower in their off-season. What happens with them is they have that wonderful active growth season in spring and summer, and that massive amounts of growth brings out these huge big pseudobulbs, and then those mature over that winter period, and those flower buds at the tips of their pseudobulbs then mature along with that, and they produce those flower spikes. Those flower spikes then open up in that early spring through until summer period, when you get all those magnificent flowers. Also here, your flowering period takes about 2 to 3 months from the initiation of those flower spikes until those flowers open. So it's quite a long process. And this initiation is all brought about through not only the changes in your daylight hours and the intensity of the light that they get. It includes the humidity changes and the temperature changes, and all of these work hand in hand with the growth stage of your orchid. Because if those new growths don't flower at the end of the season that they've just matured, those flower buds dry up off the end of them, so they're not viable anymore. So if you miss a flowering season, those pseudobulbs will not flower again. So this makes these extremely difficult to flower off-season, because it's going to take you perhaps a year, more likely 2 years, to get these to acclimatize to a whole new season of growth. And with that, you're going to have to control everything in your climate, right from your temperatures, your humidities, the number of daylight hours, the strength of the daylight that they're going to get, and the temperatures for that whole period to get that active growth going during that season that they would have otherwise started producing their flower spikes. So you need to get this orchid to turn around its whole metabolism, and that's not going to be an easy task. Even big commercial growers find it difficult to keep climate controlled situations for so long just to produce flowers on an off season with plants like this. So generally it's not done, and it's generally suggested as it's not really doable. That doesn't mean if people are trying to do specific hybrids, they're not going to do it to get the pollen off this, if they flower at completely different seasons to the plant that they're trying to hybridize with. And that's sometimes where we get the most magnificent hybrids from. But that's a completely different story, and we're going off track. So let's get back to what we actually need to do to our orchids to get them to flower in their off season, to get them to rebloom. So what have we learned about trying to get our orchids to flower, especially during those off seasons? It can be a little bit of a difficult task sometimes even impossible, but it can be done for a lot of orchids. It's just a matter of making sure you're getting at the right climatic conditions. You're just controlling the environment around it to make sure you're giving it the humidity or the dryness or the extra cold that it needs to just mature off those flowering buds so that they can then start to push their way out. It's always going to be easier with orchids that have multiple dormant flower buds on them. It will always be more difficult with orchids that just have those single flowering buds at the tips of those pseudobulbs that will dry off if they miss their initial flowering. So those will always be more difficult to get to bloom in off-season. Monopodial orchids that just need that single leaf growth then to produce a new flowering bud can be easier to get to reflower or rebloom, but you have to ensure your growing conditions are correct. And as I said, we're going to be doing a video specifically on the reblooming of Phalaenopsis coming up. If there are any other orchids that you would specifically like us to cover in a video as well, drop it in the comments box below and we'll be sure to get to it. All your suggestions for videos are more than welcome. It helps us come up with content that you're interested in. And if there's any other questions that you have, drop them in the comments box below too, or check out that Buy Me a Coffee link. Ed posts up a lot of orchid related content there all the time that is freely available to everyone. Also, if you feel like it, don't be shy, sign up, become a member, and grow like a pro. And thank you for watching. If you have found any of this information helpful, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button and that notification bell, bing bong, to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. Help us grow as we help your orchids grow.